where you have a low-calorie, high-carb diet, and you're suppressing that lowering of T3 that might help you preserve your muscles. What if you are having the symptoms of hypothyroid and you are on a low-carb diet? So you could go through this red herring process of discovering that your T3 is low and thinking that that's abnormal, even though that's just a feature of ketosis. But with all due respect, I think that what might be going on is something more like this. You know that a low-carb diet might help you lose weight, but you've also been getting mixed messages of the form of that Boston Children's Hospital where you already believe meat's bad for you, fat's bad for you, there's nothing left to eat but salad. Or you might have bought into the high-fat part of the high-fat, low-carb diet, but you're so concerned with your measurements of ketosis that you've brought your protein levels down to just the bare minimum or even lower. This is conjecture of my own, but it seems to me that a lot of the symptoms that are characteristic of hypothyroid might just be symptoms of not eating enough. How much serum ketones do we need? This is a personal measurement of mine of 0.9. I often see that, or even lower, and I think that's just fine on the in a weight stable situation. But if you really want deeper ketosis, the easiest way to achieve that is to just get rid of more carbohydrate. Because if I know that I can be ketogenic on a diet and containing 20 grams of carbohydrate, and I get rid of those 20 grams, I can add 40 more grams of protein before I even have the material available to create as much glucose. This is Andrew Scarborough, and he cares a lot about the actual ketosis level, unlike me, because he's using a ketogenic diet to keep his brain cancer in remission. And so when I first heard about him, he was doing this ketogenic diet, but he felt terrible all the time. He felt tired and weak. He gave up all his carbohydrates and was able to raise protein for the same ketosis level, and he feels great now. So it's definitely worth looking into. I just want to finally leave you with these sentiments. This is from a recent commentary on a paper about cancer, using ketogenic diets for cancer, and the problems that seem to be coming up, one of which is a lot of side effects. And this research group is out of Hungary, and they're using what they call a Paleolithic ketogenic diet, which is essentially just meat and fat. They will sometimes add very few other things. And what they say is, we view ketosis as a physiological rather than a pathological condition. It follows on from this that the negative effects of the classical ketogenic diet, which, by the way, they're not seeing, do not result from the ketosis itself, but as detailed above, emerge from an unhealthy and evolutionarily maladapted composition of these diets. So in other words, what they're saying is, if you make a ketogenic diet because it's based in meat and fat, which is a match to our evolutionary heritage, that's one thing. But if you take Neolithic foods and then mess around with the macronutrients to try to get ketosis, what you're creating is a pale imitation of the diet that should support our health. So, because we developed this special ability for ketosis, I don't buy into the narrative that starvation is what we are emulating here. I think what we're emulating is the ability to support our immense, unique brains under full nutrition and calories, and that to worry about hormonal effects is to presuppose that ketogenic diets are not natural. And even if you believe that we had some carbohydrate in our ancestral diet, I think that most people would agree that we at least had long periods of at least mild ketosis, and that this is a natural state for humans.
Thanks. We've got about 4 minutes for questions, so I don't know if there's there's no microphone over there, so maybe just shout them. Yeah, either go to the microphone or shout it out and we'll repeat it.
Hi, I'm just going to read something I found real quick. The Boston Children's Hospital has this low glycemic diet program, so that might explain why they preferred the low glycemic diet in the study, even though carbohydrate diet was beneficial in a lot of ways. But my question is, how long does it take for the glucocorticoid? Do they stay elevated forever? And is that associated with any negative health consequences, or is it just a short-term thing? One question I haven't seen answered yet is, how long can someone on a ketogenic diet stay healthy and stress-free and have a healthy thyroid?
Right. So that's a great question. One thing that I didn't talk about was the degree of elevation of cortisol. So we hear a lot in the media of the harmful effects of long-term exposure to cortisol in the body, and that might make us worry even if we're okay with the idea that it's coming about in a natural way. But just to put a finer point on it, the symptoms of prolonged exposure to excess cortisol are abdominal obesity, puffy face, fat around the neck, and fatigue and high blood pressure. And so far, I've never heard of those symptoms in long-term ketogenic dieters. We don't have modern studies of long-term ketogenic dieters, unfortunately. We can maybe speculate that if you believe that in our evolutionary past we were ketogenic for the long term, as I'm trying to promote that idea here, then you would say, well, we've done that trial. But unfortunately, I don't think we've done that in any kind of controlled way in the modern times.
Thank you so much for this really fascinating view of keto, especially that T3 piece. My question is, in the rule of thumb of thinking of short-chain fatty acids in the gut biome, how does this perspective relate to that in terms of supporting that healthy microbiome and sufficient short-chain fatty acids that would come from unfermented fiber gut biome? And then in addition to that, sort of out from that, what would there be any kind of dietary nutrients that would be missing, and how would you obtain those in what you are outlining here?
Okay, so how much fat can you get as a human from fiber if you were to eat the max, whether you're on a ketogenic diet or not? I think is really quite low. I've done some back of the envelope calculations. A gram of fiber can get you about 2 calories, but we can really only process maybe 20 or 35 grams a day without experiencing gastrointestinal distress. So that, I think, would be under 5% of your stereotypical 2,000 calorie a day diet. And getting that in fiber, regardless of, you may or may not know what I eat, which is a plant-free diet, but regardless of whether you eat some plants that are fibrous, that doesn't necessarily interfere with your ability to be in ketosis. So you could definitely eat a diet that contains a lot of low-starch plants and still be in ketosis, and that may or may not address the question that you have about feeding the microbiome. As to nutrients, meat is quite nutrient sufficient, and not only is it a better source of all the nutrients that the brain is really dependent on, but it can provide all the nutrients that we need.
I'm actually more interested in the short-chain fatty acid question from the standpoint of the plant-free diet. That's what I'm really curious about, the how, the sustained health of the gut biome. I think that's really
right.
Compelling idea, and I wonder if you've come up with some that.
Sure. Well, I have many different answers to that question. One of them is that if you look at germ-free mice, they certainly live longer and are healthier than the wild strains, and so whatever the effect is on the gut microbiome, it's not enough to make them unhealthy. But you could also point out that many of the functions of butyrate, for example, can be replicated by beta-hydroxybutyrate. But moreover, you can make butyrate with bacterial strains that are working on amino acids. So it's not like if you didn't eat plants, you wouldn't have any butyrate. But that's a really great question, and I would love to talk about it longer.
So I was very interested in your citation of Goodhart's law, and also the idea that a reference range established for one physiological state or diet might be not relevant for another one. So your example of T3 was eye-opening. What would you say about vitamin D? When I went ketogenic, it dropped, but I don't have any of the symptoms that people claim are associated with lower vitamin D. So could that be more of a consequence than a cause of certain conditions? Have you looked into that?
Wow, I've never looked into vitamin D in particular. The only things that I've read about vitamin D are that it's hard to know if vitamin D is being, insofar as there are correlations between low vitamin D and disease states, we don't know if the disease is being caused because the vitamin D is not high enough to support some function that we wanted, or if some people have proposed that vitamin D has an immune function, and when you're sick, it gets used up a lot faster, and that's the source of it. But I really don't know. I will have to look into that one.
And the second question is, I was intrigued that you see ketosis as supportive of brain growth even in childhood and infancy. Are you aware of modern humans raise their kids ketogenic, and are there any issues seen with growth of the brain or any abnormalities, or is it a perfectly sane way to raise children?
Only on a anecdotal basis, but if you look at my AHS talk from last year, it's called Optimal Weaning from an evolutionary perspective.